Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming back quickly after that light dinner. And this is the last session for the day, for the entire event. So we want to touch upon quite a few important elements of all of these discussions we have been having, which we have not at all touched upon till now. So to do that, I invite my co-panelists who are first physical here, Mr. Vipul Tuli, Professor Vinu. All right. Okay, so let me get started with the introduction. So in our panel today, we have a couple of distinguished faculty members, industry stalwarts, experts who has opinion, which they will, I hope, share freely. First up is Mr. Vipul Tuli, who is the CEO, South Asia of Sembcorp Industries. Sembcorp is a large independent power producer in India, having, I think, over 4.5 gigawatts of assets in the traditional fossil-based industries, and also about 2 gigawatts of assets in the renewable industry. So he has a thing or two out to talk about how this industry is evolving and what do we need to do more. On the virtual panel, we have Professor Dr. Anuradda Ganesh, who is the Chief Technical Advisor and Director at Cummins, also an adjunct professor at IIT Bombay. She has done the role of an academic, done a lot of academic work like what we do, now gone on to the industry, quite the opposite of what I did, spent time in the industry and came back to academics. So I believe she has quite a bit of opinions and pointers for us academics to consider and take it forward. We have Dr. Sriram Krishnan, Director of Strategy to Plant Process and US Gas Transformation at National Grid from the USA. Dr. Sriram. We have Professor Deepak Rajagopal, Associate Professor at the Institute of Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. He's an engineer turned economist turned activist, I would say, not activist yet. But we have all looking at technology choices without impact assessment. So his job is to tell us that the impact what we are creating and how do we avoid it. We have Professor T.M. Muruganandam, Professor of Aerospace Engineering, heading the Advanced Gas Turbine Concepts for Combusting Hydrogen. So I work with him. He's my co-collaborator in the Advanced Gas Turbine Center of Excellence. Here we have, as a physical participant, Professor Vinu, Professor at Chemical Engineering. His specialization is in biomass conversion, thermochemical methods, and pyrolysis. So all of that we need to do to manage the interruptions that we generate from using renewables is something that probably will take Professor Vinu's help to manage. So that forms our panel, ladies and gentlemen. So let me get started with our opening remarks. The way that I would like to organize this panel is put out some statements from a recent commitment to COP26 by our Prime Minister, which is called the Panchamrit. I thank Vipul for sharing with me a brief back of the envelope calculations, because that really brought the numbers out. It is stark, it is quite challenging. I think we really don't know how to get them. So let's, the whole idea about this third session, this final session, is to talk about enabling the transformation. When we say enabling, it is through technology, economics, policy, and also the presence of pioneers who would take the step forward when there is too much risk. So in this case, let me put out the non-fossil commitments to be about 500 gigawatts by 2030. We heard that. 50% of that to come through renewable electricity. We've also heard that. And carbon emission reduction by 1 billion tons and carbon intensity reduction by almost 45%. And to do this, we are expected to add about 525 gigawatt of non-fossil sources by 2020. Now, let me start by asking Vipul. He's been out there in the field and facing the brunt of all these commitments. And we are probably armchair policy economists, not armchair technologists, but the rest of it. So Vipul, can you tell us what does it feel, or what an IPP like Sembcorp see this green transition? What are the challenges you envision inherent in the interruptions that might come in renewables? Maybe more so by the commitment itself, what do you think has not been said or left unsaid that really needs to be addressed?
Thank you. Thanks, Satya. Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me. And although this is the graveyard shift, but I'm happy to see many colleagues from overseas as well. And so I hope we have a good discussion. Uh, I think the best uh, evidence of what a typical energy company is going through, Semcorp is a very good example of that, because we are a mid-sized energy company committed to sustainable energy. Mid-size is relevant because we are not too big to fail or fully supported by a sovereign. We are also not so small that it's irrelevant and frankly, company mortality will take care of it. We are mid-sized, we are determined to succeed, and for us, we call it our brown to green transition. What that means is, if I look at our actual capacity mix, when I joined Semcorp about 7 years ago, 6.5 years ago, we had about 12,000 megawatts conventional, almost zero renewable. Okay, that was 6 years ago. Today we are 4,500 renewable, 11,000 conventional. So almost 1/3, 2/3 kind of thing. In 3 years, it's going to be 2/3, 1/3. And if you actually think about the gut-wrenching differences that makes to how as you said, the technologies, but also the economics, the projects, the financing, the risk management, everything changes. The mindsets, the people, everything changes. It's like turning a company inside out. Right? If I had to think about what are some of the realities we are facing, okay, for us, number one, and I'm now not talking about the global company, but I'm talking about India. Let's face it, the first reality is that 80% of our energy is from fossil fuels or related today in India. Right? Unlike Europe that has good access to gas either from the North Sea or from Russia, unlike the US, which has access to shale gas, unlike even to an extent China, which has access to Russian gas, India has very, very limited gas. Bringing in LNG in the quantities we need is not really a real option. So the first thing is we need to figure out how we are going to transition this 80% fossil fuel. 80% fossil fuel means about, I'm talking capacity, but try and understand it in energy terms. For a 250 gigawatt grid, that means we've got 200 gigawatt equivalent, which is fossil fuel operating today. How do you transition that in a situation where demand is growing, let's say 4-5% a year? Right? Number one. Number two, if you come to the Panchamrit, the 500 gigawatt commitment that the PM has put out there, which I think is a fabulous energizing commitment. What that means is today we are building about, if I'm generous, I would say we are building about 10 gigawatts a year of renewable capacity in India on a good year. On a bad year, it's 8. So let's say 10. To get to, and our total non-fossil is about 150 today. By the time everyone gets energized, committees are set up, policies are made, policies change, things change, etc., you'll have about 7 years to do it, or maybe 8 years if you're lucky. Okay, so we're really talking about going from 10 gigawatts a year to 50 gigawatts a year. Okay, no country in the world except China has come anywhere close to that rate of capacity addition. By the way, in addition to the 50 gigawatts a year of renewable that we have to build about 30 gigawatts a year of conventional to support the renewable, because we don't have any real storage solution yet. And existing conventional is retiring, so we have to clean up. So that's the second sort of reality of it. I think the third reality is, and it's difficult for me to say this as a power sector player, the power sector is bankrupt today. Okay, the issue of DISCOM viability is well known. Everyone talks about it, and DISCOMs are everyone's favorite sort of whipping boy, as it were. They're in a difficult position themselves for socio-political reasons and so on. But the other interesting thing I'll tell you, if you look at the generation sector, okay, the ROE of the generation sector over the last 3 years has been average about I think it is -1%. You don't build 50 gigawatts a year based on -1% ROE on existing assets. By the way, that is a combination of, PSUs at about 8-10% and the private sector deep in the red. Today, everyone's taking great advantage of the massive liquidity all over the world and building renewables, many of them at tariffs which are supported basically by valuation premiums and so on. So the economics of the sector, the financial viability of the sector itself, I believe, is anything but proven. Right? Then the question comes: what are the technology solutions? Right? I think we've done the renewable industry has done an outstanding job of being able to go from 0 to 150 gigawatts in, I think, 15 years effectively. Of course, it was there before, earlier also, but the real scale up happened in 15. Meanwhile, the conventional energy sector has done an equally fabulous job of building what it's been able to build. I mean, the Indian national grid beyond generation is one of the most amazing human assets ever created. The copper plate that we've created at a 220, 400, 600 kV level across the country. Very few countries can boast of a grid of that kind of size, reliability, scalability. And now, of course, we are telling them, oh, by the way, I need a grid, another 50 gigawatts in Gujarat. I need it by next year. I know it takes you 3 years to do it, but I need it by next year because it takes me 1 year to do a wind farm. So the technology challenges are changing completely. So that's some of the stuff we are facing. If I had to make a few more comments on I think what is relevant for us to think about, okay, within the technological challenge itself, I would say fourfold. Number one, how do we transition the conventional plants? We had some very interesting discussions this evening with many of your colleagues, including I was at Vinu's lab with Satya, and look forward to sitting down with him later on. What do you do with biomass to these plants? How do you improve combustion in these plants? How do you actually you can easily get, not easily, you can easily conceive of at least 5-10% lower carbon just by better combustion. How do you actually get some of that done? You can maybe take another 10, 15, 20, 30% out with biomass. How do you actually get that done? Nobody has ever tried it at this scale. Is it possible? Can India be the country that does? Secondly, storage. To me, the single biggest issue for us is storage. If you had to ask me the one technology that we have to crack, very, very interesting, energizing discussion as usual with Professor Junjunwala earlier this evening around scaling up storage solutions, whether it's chillers in the basement in a distributed mechanism, or it is actually cracking anything from flow batteries to lithium-ion batteries to any other batteries at the grid scale. We don't have the solutions yet. No one has a solution for a 200 or by 2030 maybe a 400 gig grid. Nobody has that yet. So, how are we going? I don't think it's a question of whether we are going to do it. The question is, how are we going to do it? Because if we don't do that, we're in trouble. I think number three, the ecosystem for photovoltaic and wind itself. Today, we have built a pretty good ecosystem for wind. Unfortunately, it's a terrible example of how not to run a financially viable manufacturing ecosystem, because half, if not more than half, of our wind manufacturers are bankrupt today. So something about our system is not working, that some of the best companies eventually get into trouble. Right? I don't need to name them. These are very well-known companies doing exceptionally good work, but most of them are bankrupt. On the solar side, it's fabulous that we are getting started, but we are just getting started. Right? Like the rest of the world, we are 90+% dependent on China. How do we get all the way back? One is, of course, just setting up the capacities, which is what the PLI scheme of the government is now doing, and doing pretty well. It's moved fairly fast, and I'm pretty confident in the next 18 months or so we'll be well on our way as these capacities get set up. But where's the tech development? That's not our tech. That is just screwdriver tech. That is building the plants on someone else's tech. Have we actually innovated them? Have we really built it? Right? And then the fourth one I would say is hydrogen. One of my former colleagues at McKinsey used to call it, some of you maybe in the commercialization ecosystem may be more familiar with it than I am, which is what the peak of excitement and the trough of disillusionment and then some maturity of technology and so on. right? I think hydrogen is definitely going up that peak of excitement right now. Sure, as I sit here, we'll go through the disillusionment as well. The question is, how do we get to the other end as fast as possible and make sure that not just the viability but the scale up, actually works. Final comment: we have to find a way to make scaling up of the industry, academia partnership to work. When I was preparing my remarks for this evening, I was going to say I don't see too many successful models. I would take that back today. And I got to tell you, I'm really impressed by what I've seen today. The combination of IIT Madras for the early stage and the research park for the later stage scale up, etc. The combination of that, I think you guys have something deadly here. How do we actually have this kind of ambition, this kind of scale? Of course, we have to do. Right now, there's a lot of ambition and a lot of early work. How do we actually get this to churn out some of these technology solutions at scale? But how do we replicate this at least another 5 or 10 places across the country and support it with policy? Right? We haven't talked about policy, but as a developer, I could go on for another 2 hours on how important policy is and how a little tweak here or there can completely make or kill an industry. So I'll just stop there with those comments. Sorry if I've gone a bit over the time.
No, perfectly fine, Vipul. I think that really sets the context here, that we have ambition. We do know we need to transition. We have technologies, but we need to scale it up, bring the cost down, make it viable, but also a policy support is there. Here's one I would like to call Dr. Sriram Krishnan to talk a little bit about his approaches and the ones that he have seen successfully employed in using policy to enable such a transition. And I would like him to particularly address such questions like, should we wait for, say in India, Vipul just mentioned gas is not there. Maybe it is there, but we have not yet found it. We're talking big on green hydrogen, probably to soak up all the renewables that come in. Now, should we wait for green hydrogen to come in and become economically available before we start of utilization pathways, or should we develop technology for utilization before any of these other things happen? Maybe you can share some understanding on how transformation happens in other places and what are some successful models.
Sure. Thank you, Satya, and good evening to all the attendees at IITM and the virtual panel attendees. It's a pleasure to be here. As Satya mentioned, I'm at National Grid, one of the largest utilities across US and UK. And just as a caveat, my remarks here today are made in my personal capacity. I'm also a research affiliate at MIT, where I have an interest in the study of technology progression. So particularly more recently around Internet of Things, deep tech, and what I would say is the convergence of multiple technology options. We see parallels in energy industry as well, where the cost of energy is marginal cost of generation comes out to close to zero. So what does it enable? I'd make a few points. First, I love the session title in that it's enabling technologies for renewable transition. There are two things, right? There are a suite of enabling technologies, but then we still have to enable those technologies. It's a little bit recursive. And what I can also say is, if you go back to the presentation by Professor Junjunwala earlier around 100% renewable, there is a suite of options. Even Vipul's comment here looks at a suite of technology choices. They have different maturity levels. So what to do to enable each it's not one size fit all, but you'd have to think of what is the approach you would take that suits the maturity level of the technology, the adoption of the market, and the economics that are being present. In my background, I've spent a good decade in the solar industry, where it grew from roughly about 3-4 gigawatts globally total installations to about 600-700 gigawatts cumulative. So in that span, there are number of interesting things to observe in terms of what enabled certain markets, what did not. There are multiple policy instruments, and I'll yield to Deepak, as he's the policy expert here. But in many cases, when we think of technology adoption in the market, I would say you need a robust technology, you need a specific use case, and a viable business model. You will need all three of them. I mean, all through history, if you observe it, for something like you can build technology, but if you want to make money out of it, you need all three of them. And as you do this, where you saw a lot of examples in the research presentations today are technology that are at the point of getting to become more robust. Use cases so far with solar and wind, because it's electricity and kind of we benefit from sort of transmission, like so long as you plug it in and you can consume it, it's a different story. But for battery storage or for hydrogen, for example, you have to start thinking about specific use case and a viable business model, right? You have to find a customer who's willing to pay, and there is a pain point that is being addressed. Where financing comes in is you to unlock scale, you will have to have the right cost of capital that makes pool of financing available to support these at scale, right? Like when we talk in gigawatts of deployment, we are already talking in several thousands or lakhs of crores of Indian rupees of investment. So, right, like where every bit of this puzzle needs, at the end of the day, low cost of financing to unlock. I mean, even Vipul touched upon that. There was a specific question, should we wait about hydrogen? Again, not the expert specific to hydrogen. From what I've understood so far, right, with hydrogen, you have to look at the entire value chain. There is challenges and around production, there is shipping of it, and there is the end use of it. The cost of production is very high today. So there are some specific use cases where long duration storage or hard to abate sectors like steel, where the use, even the cost is worthwhile pursuing because the kind of outcomes are justified and the economic value is net improved that way. So from that standpoint, if you ask me, I would say you can't wait for one step of the puzzle to solve the entire value chain. You'd have to take steps across the value chain. Even just in the last 2-3 days, there was a pilot project announced in the US Northeast. Just yesterday, there was something announced in Andhra Pradesh as well, where specific use cases around taking renewable generation, electrolyzers, and direct either a consumer use or a blended supply within the infrastructure that is there. But these are all like really small pilots. For the scale we are talking, like you need to accelerate the pace of such experiments. That will be my answer. And on cost, right, today costs are for hydrogen is maybe $20 a kilogram. I mean, the exact numbers, I may not be aware of the latest specific ones, but if you look at targets, the US Department of Energy put out a roadmap saying we need to get to about $2 a kilogram, where it starts to unlock a number of use cases. On the EU side, there have been similar efforts where they have said you need $1 per kilogram for hydrogen to be competitive with, for green hydrogen to be competitive with other blue or gray hydrogen, where you still have the carbon emissions as a challenge. But if you really want to compete with natural gas, it's about 40 cents per kilogram. So there is a long way to cover. But here, there are some lessons from history that can be beneficial. So there is an empirical tool called the experience curve that talks about what happens as technology scale up, right? It started with observing what happened to the Ford Model T cars costs. The general expectation is that as we double the production, you learn more from the experience of doing it. There are more people innovating. There are operational efficiencies, and that you would start to see the costs coming down. More recently, you also see the value of R&D. So there are 3 specific examples, I would say. If you look at solar, it started with NASA's satellites way back in the 50s and 60s. in mid 70s, that's when solar started to have commercial deployment. In about the 45 years since, you can see a natural progression of solar's experience curve around 20 to 22% in cost reduction. At different times, it was driven by R&D, I would say more in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then in the 2000s, I will say it's driven more by production scale-ups, manufacturing efficiencies, operational efficiencies, and deployment. Another example I would say will be LEDs. While we are talking about generation technologies, LED as an energy efficiency tool is something to be proud of in terms of what India had done, because policy-driven demand in India is attributed as one of the factors that caused a large enough need that suppliers came into the market, became more competitive. It drove down LED's experience curve. A third example is around battery storage. Vipul mentioned that as another area where there is still a suite of options, but in assessing, I recently saw a publication from Professor Jessica Tranchik's group at MIT, where they said R&D, right? They could look at the reported volume and types of battery storage technologies being announced and their costs being reported, and showed that R&D had a outsized effect on driving that experience curve down. So if I look back at these comments and say, do I have a crystal ball for green hydrogen? I would say I'm optimistic that the early projections of green hydrogen's learning rates of about 20% could be viable. There is, given where things are with small pilots, I would say there is a lot of scope and room for R&D. But I'd also like to be hard-nosed to say, for those learning rates to be sustained, you'd have to really hone in on the specific use cases where it is viable, where you demonstrate the economic value, you convey the storytelling to the broader audience, get industry excited so you can scale up, you get financiers excited so that lowers the risk perception and the cost of capital. I'll pause here. I see all of us kind of coming into this question around what do we do with these sort of suite of technologies, and I'm excited for the Energy Consortium as one of the ways where we bring folks together. It's not a one size fit all. It's not one solution for any one kind of broad set of opportunities. So it's a right way. It's almost a market clearinghouse approach as we think of interdisciplinary research and multiple use cases.
Thank you very much, Sriram. So that brings me this question: are we putting too much emphasis on hydrogen? So, like this question is, this discussion is addressed to you, Vinu. Where are there other intermediate pathways where biomass to fuel becomes the dominant strategy? Maybe third generation biofuels such as algal biofuels or any such mix. Can existing refineries do it in a big way? Are we there yet in terms of technology, and what should we do? Is that an approach that should be pursued aggressively?
First of all, a big thanks to Satya for including me in this consortium. So I think it's a great event. I'm really enjoying it. Coming to biofuels, right? So biofuel is a very big term. So it includes a wide variety of fuels that we know about. It includes bioethanol at the least. And we know that we talked today about 1G ethanol, 2G ethanol, right? I mean, ethanol made out of food-based feedstocks, non-food-based feedstocks, which is 2G ethanol, right? And then biodiesel, and then drop-in biofuels, right? So there are different varieties of fuels that we can think about when we talk about biofuels. And then you have third generation biofuel, which is made out of, typically algae. So coming to where we stand in terms of the biofuel production, so much is known. I would say that the technological challenges aren't so much to crack. In fact, if you today look at 2G ethanol, right? So the India's target is to blend 20% renewable biofuel in the gasoline or petrol mix. Right, and I mean, 2G ethanol is really talked about today, right? And what is the techno-economics of the 2G ethanol process, right? So if you really think about the cost of 2G ethanol, it turns out to be like 90 rupees per liter, right? And only if there is going to be some kind of a technology viability gap funding. Okay, so it's more like an incentive that the government gives just to make sure that the economic, even though the technology may be economic, right, but there are like a lot of challenges to really get to a scale. So unless that is done, right, it is not going to be really economical. So in fact, today in India, it is seen that 1G ethanol, which is made mostly out of molasses and other, partially food-based feedstocks, combined with CBG. That's the compressed biogas, is seen as a promising option. Okay, in fact, the cost of setting up, an equivalent scale of this 1G is going to be at least 5 times, smaller compared to the 2G process, right? And coming to algae fuels, right? I mean, in India, there are a lot of, demonstrations, success stories. We know that, Reliance did a massive, project in which they grew these microalgae in open raceway ponds and developed the technology to convert it to, the renewable fuels. But and there are also similar stories, in the south, right? We had Chennai Petroleum Corporation Limited, set up this huge algae farms. But the challenge again there seems to be the techno-economics. So why would this is something that I got to know by interacting with the refinery. So ultimately, the question comes to them that why should we really grow algae to really make the fuel, right? Whereas why don't you look at some feedstock that is readily available and that can be converted? Okay, so technology is there for algae, but today again by algae again there are 2 terms here. So one is the microalgae that has been widely researched, and now today with what is called as the Prime Minister's Matsya Sampada Yojana. Okay, so they are actually talking about growing seaweeds. So these are the macroalgae, and India with its broad, very large coastline. So there is a huge interest to actually multiply the production of the seaweeds. Okay, not only for fuel applications but also for a wide variety of bioproducts. Right. So these are this is the current status as far as the the 3rd generation biofuels is concerned. But what I feel, okay, coming from so I've been working mostly in the biomass conversion area, and what I feel is we are actually missing to actually marry the environment with energy. I think that's the key. Right. So so much of what we talk about, the conventional fuels or the crude oil based fuels can be reasonably, compensated, okay, by, the fuels that we can actually generate through, pathways using, solid waste as feedstock. So as long as we consider biomass as biomass, right? So we have a set of solutions, but you can always consider biomass and also other type of waste. And this is very much, applicable in an Indian context because, we have municipal solid waste, which is not just, the biomass, but it does contain significant amount of, waste plastics to, whatnot. I mean, you can think of what is there in your dustbin, right? So there is a suite of technologies that are actually that can actually be employed to convert them to fuels. So think of it, right? So today India is importing 80% of crude oil, right? And even if I'm going to actually blend, 1%, or if I'm able to generate through a technology just 1% of the the biofuel, or let me not call it biofuel, let me call it bio crude. Okay, it's not a fuel yet, even if I'm able to mix 1%, that's going to lead to a significant savings in terms of the import, crude oil imports. So to sum it up, I would say that there are a lot of technologies. We know what the technologies are, but I think we are in a state that we need to actually identify the right feedstocks and then go ahead with it.
Thank you, Vinu. I mean, good to know that there are technologies, but I think there is a lot to do in terms of de-risking it to be taken up at a large scale. Now, I would like to call upon Professor Anuradda Ganesh to share some views on what are the big bets of OEMs such as Cummins. Transportation and engines are, of course, an important sector to decarbonize, and there are these sustainable alternative fuels. But the bandwagon seems to have been on hydrogen and electric vehicles. So, can you share with us some of your thoughts on what are the big bets of OEMs such as Cummins?
Thank you, Satya, for giving me this opportunity. Let me first talk as Anuradda Ganesh and not as a CTA of Cummins. Okay, let me just, I was just hearing everyone, so let me just put forward. I want you to look at a situation where there is an engine, there is an engine company which is going to develop. I look at it from a third person's view, all right? 3 years back, it was methanol economy. Let's develop an engine, convert the railway engines to methanol. All right. So the academicians also are all methanol, and the industry is being pushed. Why don't you convert a rail engine to methanol? Fine. And then the next year it is natural gas. All right. And then now it is hydrogen. Just imagine the state. Even if it was an academician, okay, a small engine in your lab, it becomes very, very difficult. All right. This you're talking about different fuels. Now I'll talk about the same fuel. All right. Vinu just talked about ethanol. I'll talk about biodiesel also. All right. We say 20% biodiesel. We still have only 6.6 or 5.6% biodiesel pan India. All right. So now I am an advisor to Cummins and I tell them, listen, biodiesel, we should develop something because biodiesel is a diesel substitute. We are into diesel engines. All right. We are into commercial vehicles. So what happens? We develop for, 20%, but what we are getting is only 5.6%. The engine performance goes for a 6er. All right. Once it goes out. All right. Then if we say, okay, let it be on, now they are selling B100. All right. So the fleet owners buy B100, they mix it. They are able to blend it and they sell. And we have specifications for B10, B20. Very good. Now the fleet owner says, no, B30 is going to give me more. The value addition in terms of profit is more. So B30, and there my engine goes because now the material is not compatible. So I'm just giving you, these are a few things which happen where unless we don't have a clear roadmap, I agree that today we are in a middle mess, as we call it. We are, but I think still there has to be a roadmap. And I feel very strongly that this is a place where academia and industry can collaborate, work together, and give some informed choices or evidence-based decision help to the government. All right. Now, whether the government takes or not is a different thing, because we are today flex fuel, tomorrow something else, day after tomorrow something else. We want to run, which is very good. I tell you, believe it, the industries want to run. They want to run along with the academicians. It's only that one starts here and one starts here. You're just not running together. All right. And there is a big gap which needs to be addressed. And that's where de-risking is a very, very important thing. I'll give you an example again. With all this, fossil fuels being there, and we know renewable energy is coming up. We also know, I would call hydrogen as a necessity. All right. Because if we know storage, batteries are still, the technology is still being developed. Not that hydrogen technology is all ready, but yes, where the cost is more of a factor. So especially during those times where we need to use the solar energy, hydrogen becomes a necessity. All right. So that's, all that is there. But at that time, is it possible for us to have some, CO2 sequestration, which is very, very important for decarbonization? We not talked about it today. And that is not every small industry which will do it, unless you do have technologies now where you capture and you utilize CO2, but that's not enough. I know in Tuticorin and different places, I've seen some very good examples of CO2 capture and converting into soda and all, but that's how much can you do? So you have to sequester, right? Now, even if I want to, let's even talk about just capture. There are huge plants, there's huge investments, in 100 crores and above, 500 crores and above investment. Who's going to set up the pilot plant? Okay, you do expect some amount of de-risking to take place, but the de-risking of the investment, and that's where government has to, industry has to invest, industry will invest, provided it feels that some de-risking is being done by the government. That is one. In US, when they talk about setting targets, a beautiful program, Super Truck. I mean, that's my role model program. They have different industry consortiums reaching out to individual academia as and when required and as where required, and they are integrating to ensure that the targets set are achieved. What are the targets and who sets the targets? Now, the overall engine system efficiency target is 55%. Can you believe it? 55% is a great target. How do we achieve it? There is one principal investigator industry, which works with other industries, tire industry, bodybuilder industry, the engine, all of them put together. Okay, all of them work together and they achieve. So therefore, waste heat recovery comes in, air conditioning improvement, everything comes into that, and they have to together demonstrate a 55% target. And there are different consortium. It's not one industry and one set of industries. It is a competition, it's a bid. And there are different industries who are given the project, and they allow the technologies to evolve by itself. And there could be different competing technologies which are useful for different applications. We must have something like that. I think that is a very, very important thing. And that's where I think the TR level 6, or I would say 5 to 8, that gap which is there in the country today can be bridged if we have public-private partnerships, we have such super truck type of programs, and we have industry-led projects with academia supporting it, which is existing. Catapult, Fraunhofer, we have many, many examples for it. In fact, there are committees which are working on it. I think that's very important. And that I'm speaking as a person who has been in the academia as well as in the industry, and I really see the gap. Now, I did hear someone saying, and I'm myself very, very happy with IIT Bombay, IIT Madras Research Parks, even IIT Ropur, there's so many doing it. That's not enough. That's just not enough. We really need more. We can't have just IIT Madras and IIT Bombay and IIT Kanpur and IIT Delhi doing it. We have to bring in our tier 2 universities also. We just can't have 5 of them, running the country. It's not possible. Let's understand that. Whereas I do agree that IIT Madras, I myself have connected with them and I myself have taken technologies for comments from there. But I have taken from IIT Bombay, I've taken from IIT Delhi in the capacity of Chief Technical Advisor. But I do feel that there are many more who are left out, and I think they should. And we really expect the academia to raise to that level and help the industries, because you really need to reach out. Now, whether it is industries to reach out or the academia to reach out is something which we can work out later. And I think I'll stop here. There's a lot that I can speak, but I'm going to stop here.
Thank you, Professor Anuradda. I think that really sets up a couple of questions. You talked about the frequent changes in goalposts or milestones. You talked about choices. You talked about de-risking. So now my question, this is for Professor Deepak, is, are there holistic frameworks that we can employ a priori to analyze this transformation? For example, a lot of us in the previous panels discussed KW is not KWH. It's misleading to just only talk about renewable addition. I'd also like to add here, KW added by way of renewable is not KW replaced. So are we really replacing the baseload capacity? Because there is also interruptions and there is also a non-availability infirmities. So what are the frameworks that you know that could be used, and maybe you can comment on, are they adequate? Are there things that we can learn and deploy from some other areas or new frameworks that could be developed to really analyze this transformation and set up the roadmaps that Professor Anuradha really talked about. Deepak?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Satya, for that. Again, thanks for the invitation to be here. And also thanks for the option to participate remotely. Apologies for not being able to be there. And yeah, it's an honor to be here. Just one point of clarification. When Satya introduced me, it's perfect. I was an engineer for 10 years after leaving IITM. Then for 10 years, I was an economist. Now I'm not an activist as much as a skeptic. I mean, activists will take offense at me because if they hear that, I'm not. I do work a lot on biofuels. I did a lot of work on biofuels. I did a lot of work on electric vehicles, and I'm doing it, but I'm really not a champion for those. And what I want to talk here is this being a largely an engineering focused audience and business folks. And since I am part of a department at UCLA, which is interdisciplinary, because one of the things about is the institutional innovation we want to talk about that Dr. Ganesh spoke about, or I'm part of a department where I'm one of 13 or 14 faculty, and each faculty is from a different disciplinary training. We have lawyers, we have biologists, atmospheric scientists, and one person from every department with a joint appointment with another department. I have a joint appointment with urban planning. I'm sort of more of the engineer person, but I don't do that much engineering. But what has been fantastic is working with people from different disciplines, even within an academic setting. So I want to take a sort of a non-engineering perspective, bring a non-engineering perspective, and also, yeah, you rightly said, I speak about the policy aspects. So that's what I want to touch upon. And the work I do is methodologically the framework I use to analyze energy systems in a more holistic sense is called life cycle assessment. Essentially, looking at technologies or products or services, not just what it takes to make them or what pollution happens at the point of use, but the entire supply chain, right from wells to wheels, or right from the farm to the end of life. And so that's like a life cycle assessment perspective, and you look at it, and essentially it helps you identify unintended consequences where you might have pollution shifting. We had Professor Vinu speak about biofuels. I've done work on that as well. We heard about hydrogen yesterday, but if you see about hydrogen, one of the things is it takes about 10 to 25 liters of water per kg of hydrogen, right? Stoichiometrically, it's 10. So you can never going to get better than 10. So, and realistically, you're probably going to end up with 25 liters of hydrogen, water per hydrogen, right? And so it's not, and I know the focus is on carbon and climate change, and everybody talks about climate change, but life cycle assessment tells you there are other things that matter. It's not just about carbon. If you look at the Indian context, air pollution is extremely important. Water is extremely important. So one of the frameworks I think we really need to use as a starting point, I would think, is life cycle assessment. It's a very nice framework for engineers to start off because it's very analytical, it's very quantitative. It's about mass balance, energy flows, doing it very systematically, but that's just a starting point. So I would start with the life cycle assessment perspective, look at technologies, but then not really stop there, because I think one of the key messages I want to say here is that the benefit of a technology, the social benefit of a technology, is not really a function of its own footprint. It's not really what it takes to make. Otherwise, then we will say the best technology is like, so let's give you an example, right? You can make a product very clean with your own and try to do it with renewables and so on. But when you scale it up, you're going to draw resources from the rest of the economy, right? I mean, so essentially, when you scale it up, it's going to, so biofuels, for example, you can grow biofuels, even first generation biofuels can be made very clean. You don't touch forests. you just use degraded farmland, you grow stuff, but then you need to grow it with some, if it's degraded land, you need a lot of inputs, fossil inputs, fertilizers, and so on. You transport it. And then let's say, oh, I'm not going to use fertilizer. I'm going to do it organically with animal manure. I'm going to transport it with clean trucks, and then I'm going to convert it with clean energy and have a zero carbon footprint. But that is not really scalable. If you scale it up at some point, you're going to start eating into farmland. When you eat into farmland, you're going to displace food. When you displace food, you raise food prices. When you raise food prices, farmers will go convert forests. So that's going to lead to, so you, and Vipul, I think, mentioned earlier about scale, and it comes back to scale. So the real social benefit of a technology depends on what is its footprint when it's done at scale. And when it's done at scale, engineers talk of driving down their own footprint because of learning by doing. Sriram mentioned very important concepts of learning by doing, which actually helps the engineering part of the curve, right? You drive down, your own supply chain becomes more efficient, but you have unintended consequences in the rest of the economy, what economists will call general equilibrium effects. Or you draw labor from other resource places, you draw land, you draw materials, and that can actually hurt you, which is essentially the problem with scaling up biofuels sometimes, right? So, or scaling up with hydrogen, we're going to take up a lot of water. So so first point, we need to take a life cycle assessment perspective, but that's just a starting point. We really need to look at the social footprint of a technology, social benefit of a technology, which extends far beyond its own supply chain. Just give one more example of energy efficiency, right? From an engineer's perspective, the more energy efficiency, the better. Absolutely, because for us engineers, energy efficiency is a ratio, output over input. From an economic perspective, efficiency is not a ratio. Efficiency is output minus inputs. Right? That's where the marginal things come. It's not a ratio from an economic perspective. For an engineer, it's always a ratio. That's a very fundamental, it took me a long time to understand, but it's a really important point, right? That's why economists' efficiency is benefits minus costs. It's not benefits over costs. And so sometimes, we need to keep that in mind. Sometimes too much efficiency can be a bad thing because it just costs us too much. You can't just keep on increasing efficiency. Sometimes we have to be inefficient because in a system-wide sense, that inefficiency frees up resources for something else. So we need to take a more holistic perspective. And so this is what I want to say is, we really need a research agenda, which is not, I know we are an engineering institution, that's our core strength. But I think, we really need to undertake serious interdisciplinary research and not just do lip service to social science. I know I have engineers come and tell me, for an engineer, economics is all about doing cost budgeting. I mean, that couldn't be farther from the truth, right? And again, it's about, really understanding how constraints and resource constraints, general equilibrium effects all matter when you scale things up. And you take it further, it's not even just about economics. And I know engineers and economists dominate the debate, but it's not even about engineering and economics. It's actually a lot more than that. We need a real perspective on energy transitions. If you look at all the energy transitions in the last 150 years, something is strikingly common to all of them. Every one of them, if you went from animal power or water wheels or wood to coal and steam engine, and then from coal and steam engine to oil, and then from oil to gas, and then or from heat to electricity, every one of them has been about a transition to a better energy resource, lower cost per unit, more convenient, less labor intensive, and so on. The transition we are attempting now is fundamentally different. It's not about a better energy resource. Hydrogen is not better than oil in the sense that hydrogen is best for, because it's an energy storage device. Electrons from solar are no better than electrons from burning natural gas, right? I mean, these are really not better energy resources. So we have to work much more harder, because what we desire for is clean energy, not a better energy resource. To some extent, going to electricity will help, because It can help with a lot of mechanical work more efficiently. But fundamentally, it's we have to be realistic that we are seeking not a better energy source in terms of its better energy quality. It's just cleaner. We want something cleaner. So, and there is a lot of fantastic research by geographers and historians of energy talking about how long energy transitions take. They've looked at coal, oil, gas, and for everything, it's like a S curve. But S curve, it's like it takes about just to get to 25% of the energy market share takes 50 years. And what are we talking here? We're talking about throwing away 90% of our fossil fuels in 20 years. So I think we just need to have some. So again, that's why I'm saying this. If there's any doubt that I'm an activist, this should clear it. But I'm just saying we need. This doesn't mean we don't do it. I'm just saying we just have a little bit more. We need to take we need a broader perspective. We need history. We need a historical perspective. We need a geographic perspective. We need a social science perspective. And let me just conclude with a couple of things on the policy stuff. So that's on the research side. As a research initiative, I hope to see that the IIT Madras Consortium collaborates with, just as it collaborates wonderfully with business folks. We bring in folks from social sciences. I for one myself did not take my humanities electives in IITM very seriously. It was just some coursework, but I really realized the value of social science education now. So that's on the research side. As on the policy, I think we really need policy experiments. I think as engineers and scientists, we talk of scientific experiments. We need policy experiments. And we need to experiment with what types of policy. So one example in California, US is, I have to be very careful of advising about policy sitting in the US, but one in California, we had a really cool policy that I have studied, we worked on. One is called the low carbon fuel standard. Essentially, it's a life cycle based standard. Traditionally, when we try to regulate pollution, we regulate pollution from tailpipes or just from smokestacks. This is a policy that sets standards on life cycle emissions. And so you try to reduce pollution on the entire life cycle. And so it's a tradable policy, there's incentives and rebates and stuff. So we need to think of having subsidies. So we need to do taxes, carbon taxes, and all those nice sounding stuff. We need to have subsidies, but we also need policy innovations, low carbon fuel standards, life cycle based emission standards, institutional innovations. The Solar Energy Corporation of India is an institutional innovation that came about that is actually driving down the cost of solar, that is helping guarantee payments for investments made by small investors, that you cannot rely on governments on their whims and fancies rewriting contracts. So we need institutional innovation. Professor Ganesh mentioned a wonderful innovation that's happening and about the US, in the US, about the industry consortium, like the DOE super truck program. I've studied it. It's fantastic. It's actually led by by industry, but has a very strong academic contribution. Now they're also trying to have a community presence, community participation. I was actually asked to evaluate their diversity and inclusion criteria. And I said that, it was exciting to see that they're bringing in community stakeholders right early on, because trucks hurt communities a lot, poor communities a lot. They inhale most of the pollution. So we need institutional innovation, policy innovation, research innovation, not just technological innovation. Would be the point I will stop with.
Sure. Thank you very much, Deepak. I think a lot of us skipped history and probably did not, or slept through history or whatever humanities courses. But nevertheless, we are learning it. It's never too late. Now, before I open these panels for question, I just want to maybe quick word from Professor Muruganandam. I know he is not feeling well, so I don't want to trouble him too much. But while there is so much more to do besides just technology, I just want to get a sense of readiness of technology for utilizing hydrogen. You work on gas turbines. So how ready are we? Are we likely to see power generation or aviation pick up hydrogen-based engines? And is there something India is likely to play in this roadmap? Muruganandam?
Okay, somehow video is not working right now. But anyways, I'll start by saying that we are already working with GE on a gas turbine center where we are working on developing fuel flexible gas turbine engines. Along with that, there is another startup company called Aerostravillos. I believe Mr. Vipul Tuli would have visited NCCRD today, so he would have seen that as well. Aerostravillos is a startup company which is coming out of NCCRD based on one of the patents that I'm also part of. They have licensed the patent and they are working on developing small gas turbine engines which are again going to be fuel flexible. So it can work on biofuel, it can work on methane. I believe they've used methane plus hydrogen mix and it worked. And it is working for several fuels. So whatever be the blend you given, it seems to work. Okay. And it is being used for power generation. They are also contacting electrical professors. I believe Devan was also in that team. So they are getting into the microgrid business. And they are saying that I will give it to one set of apartments together, something like that. They are generating something of the order of 100 kilowatts. So these kind of small grids definitely can work with hydrogen in the short term. If you're thinking long term, say power generation by big gas turbine engines, that's, I think the gas turbine industry is such a big industry with so many restrictions for operation and checking and all that. I think it'll take 20 years to make any change. It has huge inertia. Nothing can be done about it. But I'll tell you that most of the companies are having a race to demonstrate their very first renewable fuel, which it's going to be a mix of LNG and hydrogen. They are trying to get alternate fuels other than SAF, okay, sustainable aviation fuel, another form of some liquid fuel. So compared to that, they're trying to have a gaseous fuel gas turbine engine by 2035. That's the race they're all running towards. And we are working with GE on that, while other engine companies are all working with other major institutions of India, like IIT Kanpur, IIT Bombay, IISc. Okay, all these places are working with different companies. Okay, and GE is big time into IIT Madras, and they are also working with IIT Kanpur a little bit. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mugi, for that quick intro. So now that we've heard a couple of things, right? Technology is evolving. Hydrogen or biofuels or many things are evolving, but we still need to get into decarbonization. In all of this, we heard a lot about de-risking and probably clarity of vision, and an example was given about SECI. So maybe I'll open up this panel for questions. So if any of the panelists out here would like to discuss something more about what we heard till now, before we open up for the questions from the audience.
So, Satya, if you would allow me to answer one comment which has been written here.
Sure.
Someone has written that today young in academia is very keen to work with industry. Visit us sometime at IIT Madras Research Park. I have visited many times. I have also picked and worked with some of the industries there. You will change your mind. I don't know what mind I have to change, but nevertheless, let government not tell us what to do, but government has already given the mandate. So there's no question of telling us what to do. The mandate is there in front of the whole world. The industry and academia should put out a program and government should support. That's exactly what I said. The way industry runs after government, they should instead work with academia. Unfortunately, the regulations and the policy incentives come from the government and not from the academia. So it has to be a tri-party collaboration. Please remember, we cannot leave out any one of them. Academia is a very, very important part of any industrial development. But at the same time, we have to go hand in hand with the government policies. Yes, the academia and the industry together, the industry bodies, feed the government to help them make informed choices. And I repeat that. I think that's very, very important. Government is a set of people there who are looking for information. Otherwise, they can't make the policies and they can't make any regulations. It's all based on the evidence and data that we provide together, academia and industry. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Prof. Anuradda.
I'd like to make a couple of comments, if I may, Satya.
Sure.
I think one is about, just to pick up from what Ms. Ganesh said. If you're a young person in technology or engineering today, I couldn't think of a better time to be in this era of human activity. Couldn't be a better time. And I'll tell you why. I'll give you a very specific renewable energy reason for this. Okay, if I look at India, the renewable energy expansion or explosion that has happened and is continuing to happen at the moment in most of its forms has basically not been technology driven, at least for India. It's basically been management driven. It has been driven through management innovation, through finding the best capital, scaling up bigger projects, faster execution, matching technology with sites, etc., better operations, more digitization. Okay, digitization, you're now venturing a little bit into technology. Okay, fine. But basically, it's been management innovation. To my mind, from where I sit, I think the era of that management innovation is giving way to a new era of technology innovation. Because I think we are getting to marginal returns on the management innovation. Not that there won't be management innovation, but technology has surprised. It hasn't been too much of Indian technology yet. That era is now starting, and the next wave, whether it's storage, batteries or hydrogen or something else, and some of the others that I mentioned. So in that sense, this is the time for energy technology innovation in India, and this audience, or those whether in the room or online or whatever, this is your time. The next 2-3 decades is your time. That's point number one. Point number, I just want to make a comment on the policy side. I think many people referred to it obliquely, but maybe I'd like to volunteer sort of 4 things that I feel policy in India has to address to be able to get this tech transition right. Some of these are obvious pain points and some of these are less. One is, I think, viability funding for transition solutions, which will typically be more expensive to start with. Where the technology is very well known, I can do it, but unless I scale, etc. So viability funding for transition solutions. I think number 2, facilitation and incentivization to pilot new solutions. Whether it's the hydrothermal liquefaction type of stuff, or it's some new coal plus biomass gasification or something else, not just incentivization financially, which is relatively easier to do, but the facilitation of how do you get this stuff set up and absorbed into the grid, number 2. I think number 3, just ensuring bankability of institutions in the sector across the chain, okay, which does not exist today. I won't repeat what I said earlier. And number 4, I would say, I think the government has done a lot to help source the right type of capital for the right type of risk. A lot has been done, but there are still many obstacles, many frictional costs or restrictions for the right capital to come in. I mean, if you want really low cost, long-term infrastructure capital, then your yield funds, etc., just need to be completely seamless. Your tax rates just need to be more competitive than anything else in the world. However, if you want much more venture capital or technology risk capital, you need to find a way to get that in. So the policies that allow capital to come in and address the right. So these 4 things, I think, on policy. A lot has been done, a lot more needs to be done.
Thank you, Vipul. That really sets the context for my next question that I want to ask. I mean, this is open to all the panelists. Is we talked about SECI's example. Deepak mentioned that SECI has really helped the solar projects take off in India. Are there any other such examples that you think will help the rest of the transition to 2070 or 2050 or 2047 that we have agreed in the summit? But nevertheless, what kind of institutions needs to be set up to really achieve that?
Can I go ahead, Satya?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So if you really look at the variety of technologies that we have for, be it for hydrogen or renewable fuels, liquid fuels, right? So So as I said, right, in my response to your question, there are a wide variety of technologies, but I think we are really facing, we are not really able to demonstrate at a scale, right? So only those technologies. So we go through a typical techno-economic evaluation, right? And of course, every technology has a scale at which it is going to be, winning. But it is important that we have, as rightly also pointed out in one of the other sessions, it is important that we need to have, a government, a private, and a public partnership. I think that's the key to it. And this also needs to have, a substantial, government funding or something like a viability gap funding from the government to really demonstrate the technologies at scale. So today, considering IIT Madras or the combustion center where we are from, so we are not really working at scales that once typical academics would do, that is a bench scale. So we are really demonstrating at scales, which are which is something that the industry can easily adapt. So, for example, if you ask me what is the scale at which we work, so for example, we work on a hydrothermal liquefaction process, and we are easily pitching something like 5 tons per day of municipal solid waste processing to biofuels, right? So I would say that even we as academia, we are really capable of demonstrating at reasonably larger scales, and we really look for, of course, an industry partner. I mean, at IIT Madras, we do have a good set of industry partners to do it, and I think we also need the required government support that would really help us progress.
Thank you. So, yes, government support, institutional support is needed, but I think there is a lot of de-risking. We heard the word de-risking so many times. I think there is also this element of technology de-risking, and then maybe financial project viability de-risking before things could take off. This, of course, a continuing debate, and that's the point that we want to address to the consortium. So before I close, maybe I would like to open up if there are any questions from the audience. I know there are quite a few online, but let me take Deepak. Yeah.
Oh, just wanted to add to that in terms on the de-risking part, one of the other mechanisms of de-risking is also guaranteed demand that drives investment, right? I mean, so essentially, if the private investor can see that in addition to, like, of course, financial guarantees are there, but there should be guaranteed demand that is driving the actually procurement. So industries may not like it, but at some level, you need a certain level of mandates. So a mandate for not an insane amount, because we don't want to mandate 100% or mandate 50%, but mandating 10 or 20% and saying that, the dirtier people are obligated to mandate cleaner fuel, just like you have with biofuel. The only question is, when the government itself is the main supplier or the distributor, how effective are the mandates? If it's a private sector, actually, that's in the US, where it's like delivering the fuels or energy, the mandate can work. So mandate sends a clear signal that if it's going to be enforced, and if they have to procure, and so you back the subsidies with mandates, because subsidies without mandates, there's very clear economic reasons why subsidies without mandates are not as effective. So when you couple the subsidies with mandates and you couple that with life cycle based standards, then it also creates some competition for people to come up with the least carbon intensive or the least pollution intensive, and the subsidies go much farther. I think that's what the policy innovation is. Yeah.
I think creating demand probably by mandating converting to LED, or at least promoting LED through low cost schemes, and maybe guaranteed offtake agreements that came up with the SECI. I don't know what's going to be the mandate that will drive the rest of the innovation that is required, but I think this is a debate that will probably continue. Maybe I'll open this up for some questions. Maybe one question.
Can I ask question or am I audible? I'm Professor Junjun.
Yes, Professor Junjunwala.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. There was talk on this biofuel. Do you have some understanding of how much does a kilowatt hour of electricity generated from biofuel will cost today in India?
Okay, so this is Vinu, Professor Junjunwala. So today, if you take a biomass such as rice straw, which we all know is a key biomass from the Punjab. The power, the biomass power that you generate from it is at least 2.5 to 3 times as costly as solar. So the biopower isn't really cheap as compared to solar. And so in a recent report that we submitted to the Niti Aayog, we basically recommended that biomass to power isn't really the right option to go with, but we should probably be looking at even intermediate things like steam. In fact, if you compare the cost of steam from coal, the paddy straw based steam generation at an equivalent pressure and temperature is going to be at least twice as cheap.
Can I respond to that also?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So just from a life cycle based calculations or life cycle cost calculations, if you look at it, there is very, very little economic case for actually using biomass for electricity, simply because you have much better uses for it. If you spend a little bit more money, you can get a much more value added product. So yes, burning for biomass is simple technologically, but because it's competing with very low cost alternative resources, if you spend a little bit more money and upgrade it to a better product, you actually derive a lot more value addition from it. So I mean, so there is, in very few places is there a strong economic case for burning biomass for electricity. You would much rather make something more value added out of it.
Deepak, what about bio waste to electricity?
Yeah, bio waste to electricity. Yeah, we looked at it. We published a paper in Nature Energy a couple of years back, looking at bio waste to electricity. There are some, if you don't have huge transportation costs, again, there are niche applications where you can use it. Even there, we saw that if you want to maximize environmental benefits, you probably have to do something costlier to burn it more cleanly. But if you just want to burn it, it's cheaper to do it. But again, it has to be those situations where you really don't have the electricity from the grid. So it is, again, goes back to what are the every technology has a niche. I'm sure burning biomass to electricity has an application. We just need to find those use cases, which would be where you don't have access to grid or access to cheaper alternatives. So I think that's the thing there. It's not that it's universally not economical or universally not uneconomical.
Yeah. Professor, I think Vipul here, I think that's a killer question. Okay. I don't think I have a clear answer, but I agree with Deepak that there are different use cases. Okay. I think there is the simple calculation of firing it in a conventional boiler. If you look at, of course, prices vary, etc., but it's roughly, the variable cost is roughly 3 times. So if you have a 2.5 rupee variable cost, it becomes about, well, close to 3 times, 6.5, 7 rupees. Okay. So clearly, if you, so what that means is 2 or 3 interesting implications. One is, I think the comparison with solar, of course, as Vinu said, it's more expensive, but this is dispatchable power. Whereas solar without storage is non-dispatchable power. So you're talking very different products, very different use cases. Maybe it'll work. Maybe if you can get it down to $5, maybe you do. Related question becomes, if you're growing biomass for this, are you really decarbonizing? If you're using waste, maybe you are decarbonizing. If you then come back and say, I also tend to agree with Deepak that if you have alternate uses from, say, gasification or some form of liquefaction of the waste into higher value end products, then pure power generation is not a great case. But here we are, yet we have a mandatory 5% by October 2022 to be fired in all thermal plants. So I think I haven't answered your question, but maybe at least explain why I think it's a killer question.
I think thank you very much, Vipul and Professor Junjunwala, for that question. We're almost out of time. So the theme that's really coming out is our ability to provide technology and evidence-based support to the government in actually decision making. So we do get mandates, probably which does not make sense. We do have opportunities where there could be a lot of potential, but we don't have mandates, so we don't develop technology or we don't scale technology. I think there are two great themes that's coming out. One is de-risking involves providing some way of support for academia, for industry, for joint product development, for clarity of vision, roadmap development, and also as academia and maybe the consortium to provide technology and evidence-based support to the government in decision making. Well, I would like to thank everyone who participated in this session. Thank you very much. We don't have any more time for more questions, but we wish you had a great time, and we hope that we will continue this engagement and really get to some of these problems and questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.